Yes.
Are we recording the meeting? Is that right? Yes?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Here they come.
There you go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening.
This thing up here, sure, this meeting is being recorded. Should I just hit continue
Yeah.
Yes.
to make this disappear?
Yep.
Okay.
Look, ask them, you're not doing the land thing, right? Somebody else is doing the land thing.
What land?
I am.
Okay.
I am Lupe. Margot. Greetings to folks coming in. Looks like bit by bit you're coming in. We're still at 37.
I'm showing 37 as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have a blind dog and she decided to come and stand right here. She just hears my voice.
It sounds like the exact right spot to be.
She loves Lupe's lecture.
Yeah,
Mm.
right.
It's like we're at 40. Looks like we've got about 40 people on, which is great. Welcome to the first night of the Migrant Trail. We're just waiting for more folk to come in, so.
Jamie, I'm adding you as a co-host just in case I go missing. Okay. Great. I am going to stop your video and
Vale, okay. I wondered why I was here.
yes.
I will go away.
When shall we get started? Saulo, we only have 42 tonight?
This moment, yes.
Okay,
So,
all right.
yes, there is no, we have 127 people registered,
Yep.
but I'm assuming people will be coming in as they can. So
Okay. Kat, Lupe, when would you like to get started?
I'm ready whenever all of you are.
Yeah, I'd say whenever you decide is fine.
Okay, all right. Let's give it another minute or so, Saulo, and we'll go from there.
that's good.
Okay. Do we have Brother David on? To make an announcement?
Yes, he's coming in as a panelist right now.
Okay, all right.
Christy, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you, Brother David.
Thank you.
I'll do my introduction and then ask you to make your announcement,
Yeah,
okay?
really fine, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome all of you here tonight to the 2021 Migrant Trail. And here we are virtually, and we've got a long list of wonderful things to happen over the next week. But I won't spend too much time talking to you tonight, except to acknowledge where I am. And I would start with Bonjour, which is the greeting in Anishinaabe, which is where I am. I am on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe people, and specifically on the lands. I'm actually on the reservation of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe, and they are beautiful lands here in Michigan. Normally, if we were in Tucson during a non-virtual time, non-social distancing time, we would be in Tucson on unceded lands of Indigenous people in Indigenous peoples in Arizona, 22 federally recognized tribes, and Tucson is home to the O'odham and the Pascua Yaqui. So I just want to recognize that as we begin tonight. I'd like to begin again with a warm welcome. Bonjour, hello, hola to all of you. And we have a quick announcement from Brother David, one of our fellow walkers and on the Migrant Trail Organizing Committee. So I'll go ahead and switch over to Brother David.
Thank you, Christy. Just a quick invitation for all of our Migrant Trail walkers this year of an ongoing fast that's taking place. This fast was called for by a Jesuit in Nicaragua. And the intention of the fast is this: a fast for more compassion from the people of the United States for the migrants coming to our southern border. And this fast that began May 9th on Mother's Day will continue through June 30th. So during this week that we're together, I'd like to invite any of you who want to participate in this fast to contact me on my email address directly. And my email address is buerofm@gmail.com. Fasters can go for multi-days, 24 hours, dawn to dusk, water only, liquids only, or skipping a meal. So please consider joining us for the fast this week, and blessings to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother David. And Kat Rodriguez, one of our speakers tonight, is going to put a link in the chat for folks to look at. I want to invite all of you, wherever you may be, to put in a land acknowledgement of where you are tonight. Okay, this is a great link. And I've used it myself on a number of occasions. So go ahead and take a look at where you're coming from tonight, and feel free to share with the Migrant Trail in chat where it is that you are coming from. We'll put Brother David's email up eventually. Okay, so it may be now, it may be later, but take a look for it in the chat. Okay. So I want to welcome all of you again tonight, those of you who are joining later on, to our opening night. And again, normally we would be in Southside Church in Tucson and gathering together in person, which seems, it still seems like a far possibility for me. But here we are gathered together virtually tonight to talk about what we'll be doing for the next week, and more specifically, the why. What is the history, and why is it that we've done this for many years now, since 2004, and we'll talk about those things tonight. So I do want to say we'll be not necessarily participating in chat. I want you to be respectful of those folks who will be speaking to us tonight. And so chat will not be possible, as I understand Zoom, and we'll leave it open for questions later on. But we want to respect the speakers who are here tonight. And listen to the words and wisdom that they have to offer us. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, provided that everything's all right to move on. Lupe, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right. Let me go ahead and introduce our speaker, Lupe Castillo, who is here tonight to speak with us. Forgive my dogs barking in the background. I happen to have a couple of mouthy dogs. So I'll mute myself in a moment here, but as I speak, I would like to introduce Lupe, who has been a long time participator in the Migrant Trail and on our organizing committee as well. For a long time. We've all benefited for many years from Lupe's wisdom. Lupe Castillo is part of Keep Tucson Together. She is a retired history professor at Pima Community College in Tucson, as well as an activist in the Chicano civil rights movement. Born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, Lupe is co-founder of the University of Arizona's Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, Mecha. In 1970, she helped organize Tucson residents to help establish the El Rio Neighborhood Center and fought to build the Joaquin Murrieta Park on Tucson's west side. At Pima Community College, she was one of the first professors to develop Chicano-Chicana studies courses. She has encouraged students to see education as a tool that will enable positive change, and has been a fierce advocate of the community for various social issues for more than 40 years. today she continues to work with the Keep Tucson Together project and has been present for nearly every migrant trail. So again, for me at least, Lupe has been, and for many others, I would say, Lupe has been sort of a key voice in the migrant trail. And I'm delighted to welcome her tonight here. And thank you, Lupe. And
Thank you very much, Christy, and the rest of you who have organized this this 2021 migrant trail. I'm really going to speak some about militarization of the border. But to begin with that, being that I am a history professor, I believe that the border has been abstracted, has been removed from history so that politicians of all sorts can come and stand before the border wall and use it as a lightning rod to instill hate, fear, and other negative elements to elect themselves to office. We saw this obviously with the previous president. He got elected because he went to the border wall and began to scream and yell about putting up a permanent wall that would prevent the hordes of unwanted rapists, criminals, etc., from coming into the United States. So what I'd like to begin is by putting, in quotes, the border area into history. First of all, the border itself was established as a result of war, an invasion by the United States into the nation state of Mexico, invading through California, New Mexico, Arizona, and previously through Texas. So we have to begin there. It is a line that goes from California to Texas, and it's just under 2,000 miles. So its establishment was as a event of great violence that had already been visited into these regions before. And so I think we need to begin by placing this region, the border area region going from California to Texas, into its proper base. And that base is indigenous. The indigenous world presence has been in this area from time immemorial, before history, before the written record. And for indigenous communities, the written record is a very late comer. The speaking voice, the memory, the elders transmitting this presence is what has kept the communities in existence in face of genocide. So I think we need to begin with that. And I think Christy made reference as an example to the state of Arizona that has over 20 indigenous communities and languages as well. And when we think of that, we are thinking in terms, as we sit here right now, there are communities across this region who are living in their own time, in their own culture, in their own languages, within the circle of their elders. And that they live and are in their space. Outside of that space exists what we call the nation state of the United States, and that these people who are native to these regions can see themselves as who they are in time, in their stories, and yet also be citizens of the United States, because it is okay to have that political identity that has been imposed by the nation state, United States citizen. But if you were to ask somebody, who are you? If they're Pascuayacti, they will say, I am Yaqui. They are not going to say I'm a United States citizen. Or if somebody asks me, who are you? My identity is Mexicana, even though I was born in the United States, as were my parents and grandparents. But so I think it's very important for us to understand and respect that history, that pre-existing from time immemorial historical presence and mythic presence is the basis where we have to begin from. That is why an elder said once, that border pierced our hearts. For many of us who are of the nation state, it's hard for us to understand that. After all, the border protects us, but it is a painful physical existence. And I think the other thing is that we have to see also ourselves who are native to this region in a different context. Is the narrative history of the United States is an east to west, an inevitable movement from the east to the west that was ordained by God for a chosen people, which we have come to call manifest destiny. And I would submit that today we call it American exceptionalism. It's one and the same. And so in those movements and previous movements from Europe into this region, the Spanish, the English, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and so forth, of movements of invasion and conquest and the establishment of colonial systems that still are embedded. And even within the establishment of the United States as we know today, the establishment of continuing those systemic structures that enabled genocide, slavery, colonial systems, conquest, and justified them as well. And so there were systems that were put into place that are the legal systems that we have come to call the Jim Crow laws, and even before they were called that, they were in existence. And then the extra legal, the use of outside of the state, but the state allowing massacres, lynchings, and other terrorist activities, as we see today, as we commemorate and remember Tulsa, Oklahoma. What happened, it was buried. The state decided this should not be told, so the story was not told, as many of the stories that continue that are around the border. So that what we can say is that the border from day one was already militarized, and that militarization continued throughout. And I will move here to our present. The Border Patrol, for example, established in 1924, was established. Some of the first agents of the Border Patrol came out of the Texas Rangers. And the Texas Rangers, as all of you know, were a state terrorist organization to control Black populations, indigenous populations, and the Mexicanos in Texas as well. And their history and culture of being a state-sponsored terror group went into the Border Patrol. So that today the Border Patrol and ICE, even as they grew from a couple of agents to the massive organization that it is today, carries within it that same culture, no matter who is wearing that uniform. They are, trained to think in that way. And so we have to understand that, and we see the presence of those individuals in this region, whether they were the Chinese in California, the Japanese Americans who were placed into concentration camps, the Chinese Exclusion Acts of the 19th century, all of these laws that were used as control. So the border was just one of the means by which to control these populations. And so some of these laws that were put into place were very important in the control of the workers, right? So that the border was open when capital interests needed to have those workers. So when we see the great development that occurred by the late 19th century and early 20th century in the western part of the United States, the federal government put tons of money into the development of infrastructures, such as the damming of rivers, such as building of railroads, the building of new towns because of the railroads, industrializing the cattle industry, the agricultural industry as a result of cheaper water. And all of this needed workers, and workers were brought in. And because of the controls that were already in place, the systemic controls, those populations were segregated. They were under certain Jim Crow laws. And so the population was controlled either through those laws, local laws, practices, norms that were established. Like you could go to any mining town in anywhere, in any part of the United States, and you would see that control was very visible, where like even like in a place like Morenci, Clifton, or where you have a Catholic church saying, we're going to bring these young kids from orphanages in New York, and Catholic families can adopt them. It turned out these kids were white kids, right? And so when the Anglo community members found this out, they went and rounded up all those babies and took them out of Mexican families, and because this was not permitted. This then is the history that is present and living among us, and certainly the militarization that we begin to see with free trade, jumping way to our time, with the beginning of the 1990s and the establishment of free trade. We call it the neoliberal trade because there had been liberal trade in the 19th century and other times. So that free trade was a tool that was used to enhance the wealth of a few people. And the free trade that was established between among Canada, the United States, and Mexico began and was established and literally opened the borders, right? The borders really have always been open, at least in this part, for those who had money. But now it was truly structured into the system that capital could flow, goods could flow, wealthy people could flow, but the control was in the workers. And that was the establishment of immigration policy and the growth of the Border Patrol and the creation of ICE and other organisms to maintain that control. So when we talk about the border should not be open, the border is open. It is open. It is only controlled for those who are the working people. If agricultural interests need workers, they bring them in, they import them like goods. If a wealthy factory owner wants to move a factory from Tucson to Sonora, they will pick it up and move it. Factories can move. If unions establish themselves in those maquilas, they will move the factory to Guatemala. So that's the power that is confronted by those people in movement. In the recent book by Todd Miller, and I would recommend his work, he is a tremendous reporter and writer. He shows how almost close to 300 million people are living outside of their borders where they were born today, and that it is predicted that many more as a result of climatic changes and all of the devastation that the few who control much of the wealth of the world visit working people across the world. And so when we look at this, what we see then is that the borders serve a purpose for the nation state. The nation state has become the security element for those who make wealth. It is the police state to control those movements and the increase of wealth. And so the resistance then that is coming forth is coming from those who are in movement, the migrants across the world. They are leading us forth into the new world that is being formed as the background, the enormous climatic changes and other tremendous changes that are occurring. It is these individuals, as we see them moving across the world, across the planet Earth, who are the people that are what I consider the revolutionaries of the 21st century. They are changing the world. This is why within the United States, there is so much repression. You know, there is so much fear that the world is changed. Well, I have to tell everybody the world has changed. In fact, it is now changed. It is now in a moment in which we will see the coming down in the questioning of the nation state and its purpose. And when we talk about borders, borders are not fixed. And if you look at a map, let's say from before the First World War or from the Second World War, we see that borders come and go. But as Cesar Chavez said, we are here. And the indigenous communities are at the forefront of this resistance everywhere across the world. And they are in this movement of migrants, of people who are fighting in the midst of every step that is taken. And some of it is tragic, as Kat will refer to later. It is painful, to see water being drenched out of the desert to build walls that are meaningless, right? That it is these people who are the true people in resistance. We have not seen the end of our history, although many think that history has ended with the United States. No, it has not. It is, I believe, the indigenous people who will come forth and be our future for a better world and a more just world across the planet Earth. So I leave you with a sense of hope, because I believe truly that the changes are coming, and they are coming from these communities that are leading us forward to that world that we hope our children and grandchildren will see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lupe. As always, giving the history of the lands along the border, and then the larger questions as well. So thank you very much for giving us that, and again, your wisdom. Yeah. Anyway, so what I'd like to do now is introduce our next speaker, who's not able to join us, but I'll do that in a moment. I do want to remind folks Just in the Zoom land that we're in, and again, social distancing and a virtual migrant trail. The chat is there, but I'd like folks to keep the chat off and away from what you want to do. Just nothing in the chat box, as a reminder to respect the speakers and give them the full attention that you have as we're going through this. We'll have a chance for Q&A at the end. So just give your undivided attention to the speakers. And tonight, the next speaker after Lupe's wonderful talk is Magda Menkel, Dr. Magda Menkel, who is a Tucson-based researcher and educator who first walked the Migrant Trail in 2016. Just last month, Magda earned her doctoral degree in anthropology from the University of Maryland, College Park. Her dissertation, Walking the Migrant Trail, Mobilizing Cultural Heritage Resources in Southern Arizona. She'll be sharing her experiences, she shares her experiences walking the trail, interviewing participants and reflections on the wisdom shared by the walk's many organizers and participants. She is from Nogales, Arizona, and she was born to parents of Mexican-American descent. So what we'll do now is put on a video recording of Magda's words for us tonight. And we'll go ahead and do that as soon as our delightful web or Zoom master takes care of that. So we're working on that. Wonderful.
All right, I think I'm recording, so I'll get started. My name is Magda Menkel, and I was asked by some of the organizers to put together a brief little presentation on walking with intention. And I decided to focus on this topic because I know that we are not meeting in person and that we don't get the benefit of being in the desert this year. But there's a lot of lessons that I've taken away, and I think other folks have taken away from their time in the desert. And I'm hoping we can bring some of that into this virtual community. So even though we're not really walking, or maybe some of us are, maybe some of us are choosing to walk in our own communities, even if we're not walking in the desert, I think we can do this all really with intention. And so I'm gonna go to my PowerPoint that I presented, and I'm gonna share my screen and we can start unpacking this concept together. Okay, here we are. Okay, so yes, I'm titling this Walking the Migrant Trail with Intention, Reflections on Being Present, because hopefully these things I share today will help you be more present and really process the Migrant Trail experience this year, which is of course all virtual. So to unpack what it means to walk with intention, I think a lot of it has to do not just with like showing up, but also with like establishing kind of like a sense of a ritual space and recognizing that you are joining a community of like-minded individuals who care about a topic deeply. It's also about bearing witness, crossing personal but also social thresholds, and really challenging our own personal boundaries as we continue to learn about this topic. And also just raising consciousness and thinking about how we can continue our journeys after the Migrant Trail is over, comes to a close. Oh, and I should preface this by saying that everything I share is based on my own experience as a walker. So I walked between 2016 and 2019, so 4 years in a row. And then in 2018 and 2019, I was actually conducting some doctoral research for my degree in anthropology. And during that time, I ended up interviewing around 32 participants and asking them about, why it is that they've chosen to walk and what does the walk mean to them and all of this cool stuff. So what I'm sharing is largely based on my experience, but also on what folks shared with me. So something that is really obvious or that you really feel when we're out in the desert is that we are very much entering like a very kind of like a sacred space, a very ritual space. And some of that is established by the ceremonies that we do out there, and some of it is kind of felt because we are so isolated and we're in wilderness and we have all these amazing opportunities to just get to know each other in that isolation. But I hope that's the feeling that we bring onto this virtual platform, and just recognize that even if we are logging in as a person, just recognize that you are part of a larger community, that there's lots of folks who have signed up and are learning about this throughout the week. So we're really together, even if we might seem kind of distant. And if you're a person that thrives on routine, it might actually be really helpful for you to start your day by reading either the vision statement or the mission statement. I know that when we are out in the desert, we start our day off by doing this. We either read the vision or the mission statement as a group before we start walking. And for me, it's always been a really grounding experience, because it reminds me of why I'm out there, and it kind of reiterates some of the key values that the group is trying to bring across. So I definitely recommend that. And when we're out there, another concept that sometimes we discuss is this idea of bearing witness. So I encourage you all to bear witness. So even though we are not physically there, you can bear witness from afar. And a lot of this is, just showing up and making space for these conversations, and commemorating the day dead also through like symbolic and embodied action. So really clear example of that is like reading the names that are usually written on the crosses and then responding with presente. And I know that we will be reading names at some point during this week. So that's very much an example of, bearing witness, of remembering folks, and also refusing to forget, and also amplifying voices without speaking for others, because the Migrant Trail is like never intended to be like a simulation of the migrant experience. So it's important to keep that in mind. And when I talked to folks about this idea of bearing witness and what it might mean to other people, different things came up. For the most part, it's definitely, being intentional and showing up respectfully for the dead. It's also about, some folks mentioned that it feels a lot like unpacking your own privilege and sitting in your own discomfort. So coming to terms with that privilege, but then, flipping it around and mobilizing it. So how is it that you could use your resources to help others who might be going through a traumatic experience, right? Another thing that came up is that it's about listening and being more of a student than a teacher, especially for those who are new to this topic or new to this region and are just now starting to learn about what goes on out here. And lastly, I think one other key characteristic of bearing witness is that it's really geared towards social justice and healing. I would say that it's not just about accountability and refusing to forget. It's also about trying to collectively heal a trauma that is felt by many. And so something else I encourage you all to do is to just anticipate crossing some personal and social thresholds. So, and here I have a picture of the border wall in Sasabe, Sonora, looking into Sasabe, Arizona. And it's just one example of a very symbolic, but also very geographic threshold that we cross. But there's also all these other kind of internal and social thresholds that we cross as well. So on a personal level, like be ready to kind of interrogate your own thoughts and ideas, and really engage in self-reflection. I know throughout the week there are discussion questions that you can do on your own or with groups. And really it's an opportunity to relate to those who we are trying to remember, to relate to migrants who continue to cross, and also to relate to other current events that are currently happening here in the US-Mexico borderlands. So yes, definitely an opportunity to look inward. And here I have some examples that folks shared with me when I interviewed them. So for this individual in particular, he reflected on how contemporary immigration policies really connect to his own family heritage, since he is a descendant of immigrants, but also he connected it to this like American immigration myth and also to his own faith. So I'll let you read that. And here I have another quote from another, this is a lady, and she talks about how for her, the Migrant Trail, it's more of a social therapeutic outlet. So for her, it's about expelling the grief that she carries throughout the year, and helping other, like say family members expel that grief as well. So again, there's a lot of time for reflection, both personal, but also this opportunity to contextualize this experience in something bigger and something more social. Okay. So in addition to crossing thresholds, I think another thing that you should be prepared to do is to raise consciousness. So how is it that you could continue to raise consciousness by sharing your experience with others who may be unfamiliar with what is going on out here in the desert, right? So how can you engage others in discussions? How can you share your newly acquired knowledge? I think that's another important thing to think about throughout the week. And last, I think this is also like an opportunity to think about how you can continue to build your network of allies and advocates and activists, because you'll find that even after the Migrant Trail is over, your journey will continue. And a lot of times folks don't even process the event until well after the Migrant Trail is over. For me especially, I remember walking it the first time, and I just really didn't understand its significance until months later. I just really had to take some time and unpack it because it was pretty powerful. And it takes a while to understand how things come together. So yeah, definitely encourage you to continue reflecting on the experience and also thinking about ways to share it. And that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed all the pictures I included. I just wanted to really emphasize the place and the desert, since it's something that is missing this year, but it's also something very special that I think gives the walk its unique kind of feel. So yeah, I think that's all I have for you. Let me stop sharing the screen. All right. So yeah, that's all I have for you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks so much. Bye.
I'm sure if we all had Magda in our midst, we would thank her very much for that overview of what the Migrant Trail is like for us all when we're present, but also the ways in which it can be meaningful if we're not. We're present here with each other, which, as we know, in the last year, and this would be the second year of the Migrant Trail that we've done it virtually, ways in which we can be present even when we don't look at each other face to face in the kiva of Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson. So, and as the week goes on in the desert. So I hope that you all are able to take Magda's words to heart, and to be able to walk intentionally this week in whatever ways we manage to do that. So thank you very much, Magda. And yeah, all right. So I'd like to move on to the next speaker tonight, Kat Rodriguez, who is one of the founders of the Migrant Trail and a long time friend. I'll say that as well. I've been walking since 2007, with some pauses here and there, and I have always felt incredibly grateful to have Kat as a part of the Migrant Trail. And I will say both as a walker and just personally, how much I've benefited from her wisdom and deep knowledge of this place along the border and elsewhere. So it is a true honor to introduce her tonight to talk to us about the why of walking. So Kat is a Tejana Chicana with nearly 15 years working in the social justice movement. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree from California State University, Sacramento, and a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Arizona. She has worked with farm worker struggles in Florida and Oregon. Most of her social justice work has centered on issues faced by migrant communities and more specifically, deaths of migrants along the US-Mexico border. She works right now as programs coordinator for community home repair projects of Arizona and volunteers with the Alianza Indígena Sin Fronteras and Casa Alitas. Sorry, my Canadian accent came through. She has been on the Migrant Trail Organizing Committee since 2004. So thanks to Kat, who has spoken to us many years about the why of the Migrant Trail. So take it away, Kat. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to be in community with you this week. Some of you have been emailing with, as I also do registration for the walk. I am going to share my screen as well. I'm going to have a presentation I put together around basically why we walk and how that came about. Oops, wrong button. There we go. So the why of why we walk the Migrant Trail. There's several of us that have worked on the border for many, many years. And the deaths really started spiking around 2000 in Arizona. And this was a new kind of thing. So a few of us have actually known people who've crossed. We've known people who've died. We know relatives of people who've lost family members on the border to the border. So in 2004, 3 people, Richard Boren, Holly and Todd Miller, who will be part of one of the talks later in the week, came up with this idea of walking in the desert. And to be very clear, we are not in any way interested in simulating the migrant experience. We are very, very aware of our privilege, and we talk about this a lot on the physical walk, that we are not trying to simulate migration or say that we know how difficult it is, because there's just no way to strip our privilege down enough to even come close. But for some of us who actually knew people and live in this desert, we had this desire to walk, to be there, to know. And as we came to frame it, to bear witness. And so that's how the walk started. And this is just an excerpt from our vision statement. The precarious reality of our borderlands calls us to walk. We are a spiritually diverse, multicultural group who walk together on a journey of peace to remember people, friends, and family who have died, others who have crossed, and people who continue to come. So understanding, and Lupe did, of course, as always, an amazing framing of the history of the border. And what we want you to understand, if you don't already know, is that death is not, it's not an accident that people are dying on the border. It's also not an accident that people are crossing on the border, specifically in Arizona. This has been a strategy historically by the US government to control migration, specifically migration from Mexico, right? So the strategy of militarizing traditional crossing points and pushing people or funneling them, as the Binational Migration Institute, which did an amazing report about this. The way that the border was militarized meant that people were funneled into the most isolated, desolate areas. So it is not a surprise that this is happening in Arizona, just like it's not a surprise where people are migrating in other places. What has been put out there is that, that this was going to make it more difficult to cross, that it would be easier to catch people, and that there would be hardships, as they framed it, and that those hardships would serve as a deterrence to future crossers. And historically, we know that that has not happened. It is definitely more difficult to cross. I think it's arguable whether it's easier to catch people because agents are also now in these isolated areas. But the reality has been that there has been an explosion of death on the border, and that has not changed to any significantly important degree. The fact that people are migrating, what it's done is shifted where they are migrating. And what we saw is basically that as militarization got ramped up in the 90s, eventually, as it shifted into Arizona, in around 2000 is when we started seeing the increase of deaths on the border. And this, I moved here to Arizona in 2000, and this was just starting to explode, and people were just shocked every year as numbers got higher and higher. So Pima County made the news in 2004 because the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner actually ran out of room at the morgue for all of the remains that were coming in. And they had to rent a refrigerator truck to house the additional remains that were coming in. And I think it's very telling here locally, the news wasn't about like, oh my God, these are, I think it was 79 remains were recovered in the month of July of 2004. It wasn't like, oh my God, there's so much death. It was, oh my goodness, we had to rent a refrigerator truck. And do you know what the expense of that is on taxpayer dollars? And that, really, I think is indicative of sort of like where the heart of policies have been, which has not been centered on humanity. It's not been centered on human rights. It's not been centered on recognizing the loss of life, the human cost of militarizing the border. So typically, and the estimate here of 8,000 men, women, and children, the remains, and we say recovered remains because oftentimes when individuals are found, they're not found intact. They're found in various degrees of decomposition. Sometimes it's just a few days, but it can be years. And as someone told me once, the desert can actually devour completely a person with enough time. So between the elements and the animals, there can be very little of someone. And so the term recovered remains is what we use as the most accurate way to describe what we're seeing. So this number 8,000, this is based on recovered remains. We really do not know. Nobody knows how many people have actually lost their lives on the border. Majority of the deaths occur due to the elements, dehydration, exposure. We have hyperthermia in the summer, and people don't realize how cold the desert gets. We actually get a fair number of hypothermia, people freezing to death in the winter. There are drownings. We have flash floods. There's canals down in Yuma. And there's also been shootings by Border Patrol, automobile accidents where severely overweight vehicles with like 18, 19 people packed inside have a high-speed chase, or a tire blows out, the vehicle goes flipping, and then you get mass casualties because none of those people, usually except for the driver, even have a seatbelt on. So this is, this is the reality of how people are dying on the border. We bear witness also that there has been death at the hands of Border Patrol, of our policy, sure, but also the individuals. There has been documented violence by law enforcement that goes from physical assault, sexual assault, racial profiling. And I want to point out a few things. Racial profiling doesn't just affect undocumented immigrants or migrants, right? It affects people of color, because agents don't know, and many of the agents who are sent to Arizona are from outside of the border, and they don't always understand that brown does not mean Mexican in Arizona, and it actually does not mean you're undocumented, even if you are Mexican in Arizona. So these are affecting not just migrants. In fact, in this photo, Bennett Patricio Jr., Carlos Lamadrid, and Ezequiel Hernandez Jr. were all US citizens who were killed and murdered, basically, by Border Patrol agents. So we have to acknowledge that as well is happening, that it's not just the loss of lives of migrants that's affecting even US citizens, that it is affecting mostly people of color. There was also, I just want to highlight this, is about, especially some of you may have seen this, in 2018, Claudio Patricio Gomez Gonzalez, who was shot by a Border Patrol agent in Rio Bravo. He just blindly shot and he shot her in the head. And this is a 20-year-old young woman. I mean, this is, the loss of life is just, it's truly tragic on many levels. We also have to bear witness to the deaths in US custody. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the news. Anytime you're watching any news, they talk about asylum seekers, and that is something that we also are highlighting and elevating, amplifying the issues around that in the migrant trial these last 2 years, because we've also seen high levels of that in Arizona. But I also just want to highlight a few of recognizing some of the deaths that have happened in US custody, people in detention centers, children specifically. And all of the children I'm going to highlight here are Indigenous children. And the Indigenous communities, and we talked as we started to recognize that we are Indigenous land, but also recognizing and understanding that the majority of migrants and asylum seekers, or many of them, especially from Guatemala and Mexico, are Indigenous peoples, and many of them do not even speak Spanish as a first language. And just the fact of being Indigenous is an extra layer of vulnerability. So over the last few years in US custody, we have seen that disproportionately Indigenous children and youth have died in custody. So I want to bear witness to that today. I want to share with them, and one of our participants, Mick, has given me permission to use these beautiful photos. She and I worked on a project together, and so I asked permission to share them. But I want to just show these faces to you of these beautiful children who died in the custody of our US government. Another excerpt from our our vision statement. We bear witness to the tragedy of death and to the inhumanity in our midst. Lastly, we walk this sacred journey as a community in defiance of the borders that attempt to divide us, committed to working together for the human dignity of all peoples. In putting together this presentation this year, I used Humane Borders. If some of you know the organization Humane Borders, one of our allies, the group that brings us water for those who have walked the Migrant Trail, the wonderful, wonderful truck that brings us water and allows us to rinse off and cool down a bit. They have a mapping program on their website. And so I was going to just pull up the slides of the remains that have been recovered in Arizona. And I got curious and actually went back to the very beginning, the oldest records they have. So what I put together for you are the numbers starting in 1981 of what the remains have been. And I'd like to do this just to show you, numbers will speak for themselves, what the reality of the deaths on the border have been. So 1981, actually that should not be 163, I'm so sorry. That should be 1 recovered remain. And the rest I'll just do in silence as I just did. I apologize, it was 2 a.m. when I finished this. So this should be 1 and I will correct that soon. And as you notice, I'm gonna scoot back 1 second. These actually, there'll be some years that are skipped in the very beginning, which I understand that to mean that there were no deaths that year. So I am going to, actually, let me go back for a second. I'm going to go back. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I want to explain something to you about the way these numbers came about. These were generated. The Binational Migration Institute worked with the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner to create criteria that they would use to decide or determine what they call a UBC, unauthorized border crosser. And they used it, the factors that they used is they couldn't just say, a brown person that died in the desert, because that could be a lot of people in Arizona. So it had to do with where they were found, their belongings, condition of their remains, things on them. So like somebody that's found near the border with a backpack and they have money from El Salvador, and the black gallon bag, water jugs and camouflaged, or the little carpet shoes, carpet shoes. So those kinds of things were created to determine. And so that was done in around 2000, or the numbers went back to 2000. And so then some research was done to go back further, and they applied it to older records. So I understand that's why there's gaps in these numbers. That makes sense to me. So when you say like, how do you know? This is how that they know. And they're not 100% for sure, because there could have been migrants who died that either weren't recovered or who didn't quite fit the criteria for whatever reason. Maybe they were living in the US a long time, so the belongings they had on them that were not from Mexico, maybe they were from where they were, from Tucson, because they lived in Tucson and just went home for the weekend, and then, while crossing, perished. So I'll go back to sharing my screen. I have fixed that number, but I want to go back. I just wanted to give you some context for why we have that. So, okay. All right, so fix that. 1981, here's 1. So I'm going to just go through in silence for you. And you'll note the years might jump a bit in the beginning because there's not data, or I would assume it would be 0. And the little red dot is to show you those are the GPS coordinates or the approximate location where those remains were recovered. Sometimes you'll see them near a highway, and you'll say, well, why would somebody die near a highway? It may not be that they actually died on the highway. It might be that they died further in the desert. But the agent didn't take a GPS coordinate until they brought the remains back to their vehicle, which was parked off the road. So that sometimes can happen. So it's not perfect. This is the closest we can get. And I will say that Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner would be probably the gold standard for this, in my opinion. So I'm just going to go through from it. So this is 1981 to present. And I ran the numbers as of yesterday. And this map is a cumulative that was done of 1999 to 2019. And you can see this is all the dots together. And you can see that this goes pretty extensively. And I always like to end my presentations with this slide. This is from a mural at the Camin in Alta Sonora. And it says, if we don't think differently, everything will be the same. And that would be my invitation to you this week to recognize that we need things to be different. We really do. And if we don't change the way we're thinking about the border, if we don't take the time to change the hearts and minds of people, especially those that have power, then things are going to be the same. And for us on the Migrant Trail, that's not okay. We want there to be a day where we don't walk, not because we're tired, but because there's no death, because we as a group made a promise and made a pledge that we would walk until the death stopped. So that is my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat. I think I want to give everybody a moment to think about that as we begin to bear witness this year to the deaths in the desert. And as we're thinking about so many other things in the world today, too, but to see very palpably tonight, based off of Kat's presentation, what's happening in a corner of the United States. I was struck, having not seen the numbers from 1981 through today before. That's when my family bought a house in Arizona in 1981, and in a home that in a land that has become one of the places I call home, just to see the devastation is it brings tears to my eyes. So think about that. Carry those images with you this week as we learn, as we talk, as we walk with intention this week. Just remember some of those things. So now,
Christy,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Kat again. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention to everyone in your participant packet on page 12. No, wait, let me double check the page number. On page 8 is the list of the remains that have been recovered on the border from October 1st. We usually count fiscal year. The charts I showed you just now were run calendar year, January through December. So the numbers are a bit different, but these numbers go from October 1st, 2020 to May 26th when I got them from the medical examiner's office. And so you're all invited to reflect on those. It is in your participant packet. And if any of you didn't get the participant packet, please email us and let me know so I can make sure to get that to you. So thank you. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Thanks, Kat, for that important reminder. Yeah, do take a look at those. I think more than anything else, those names, that's why we're here this year and all the other years. So I do want to take a break here now, or not a break, but just a moment to give a couple of reminders. Those folks who've chosen to participate in breakout teams, the first meeting is tomorrow. It's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we're in the absence of physically present community. What we'd like to do this week is call folks together in smaller groups to discuss, to reflect upon, to think about, to sit with what were the tragedy that we look at this week on so many different levels. And each day will have a different focus, but we'll reflect upon what we're thinking about together as a group. If you haven't gotten an email tomorrow with their assignment and the team Zoom link and the time, make sure to let us know. You should have that tomorrow, okay? So I do want to remind folks of that. And then also the schedule for the week as we go through with the speakers and other information too. Take a look at the packet and the schedule for the week with the links and all of that you can find in the packet. Okay, so take a look at this and please let us know if you haven't gotten it at azmigranttrail, all one word, at gmail.com if you haven't gotten the participant packet. So again, it's azmigranttrail, one word, at gmail.com if you haven't gotten that, okay? And the team assignments only went out to those folks who opted to participate in the breakout sessions in the team meetings. So if you are unable to or did not elect to do that, you will not get that information, okay? So what we'll do now is go ahead and move to the Q&A. We have two people here tonight with us, Lupe and Kat, who will take your questions. Go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A. And I think, yeah, I do want to just take a moment as you're thinking about the questions you might have for both Lupe and Kat. I do want to take a moment to thank Saulo, one of our Migrant Trail, on the Migrant Trail organizing team, who has done a wonderful job with Zoom tonight. And I think it's just Saulo, it's not Eric tonight, is that correct? Okay, so thank you, Saulo, for your work on Zoom. I hope you'll all thank him in some manner. Being behind the scenes, as we all know, is never easy in a virtual environment. So thank you, Saulo, for your work. Okay, so I'd like folks to go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A section here. I've asked that folks remain quiet during our speakers, but now we have a moment to talk to our speakers. So let's go ahead and have some questions roll in.
Did you hit the chat and see if they open up here?
I haven't seen any questions yet. Are the questions working?
Maybe nobody has any questions. Maybe Lupe has answered everyone.
Right.
Everything's there.
Maybe they're in the chat.
Okay, I'm seeing him in the chat, right? Thanks, Tracy, for that. I do, again, as folks are thinking of what questions they might want to ask, I do just want to thank everyone for being here. It's a commitment in a normal year, but it's also a commitment to be in front of a screen again after a year of isolation from folks, and it is wonderful. I will speak from my own experience only, but it's wonderful still to be able to gather, even if it's just on video. And so thanks for coming. So anyway, go ahead and share with your questions. You know, I know that not everybody knows each other at the moment, but feel free to ask questions. So we have one from Nadine, and she is asking a question. After they find the identification of someone that dies, what is the procedure to let their family know? So that's a great question. Kat, I'm assuming, and Lupe too, if you want to chime in.
Sure. So it all depends on how they're identified. So, and where the family is. So a lot of the people, so in the best case scenario, someone dies. That sounds terrible to say. In the best case scenario, somebody dies, but the best case scenario is there's identification on them. And ideally there is still the possibility to say take fingerprints. There was one man, I remember he died, and it was so hot at that time that he was actually mummified, and they were actually able to rehydrate his hand and get his thumbprint, and identified him on his ID that he had in his pocket, which had his thumbprint on his Mexican ID, and Mexican ID has thumbprints. So if the family is in the United States, for example, the consulate of their country of origin would coordinate with the family to return the remains to the family, wherever they might be. So the family sometimes might choose to have a relative who's in the US receive them. I do also want to say that if somebody, so when remains are recovered, there's an exam, an autopsy if it's possible. If they're skeletal remains, they go through a forensic anthropologic exam. And then after a certain amount of time, if there's no further leads, like all the phone numbers on them or everything's ID'd, photographed, everything extensive. And then because of the policy of Pima County, they retain a piece of bone fragment. They send a sample to DNA of the DNA to have that on file, and then the individual is cremated. So if you were to say, hey, my sister went missing in 2006, and we now think she might have been crossing, they could potentially take DNA from me, or ideally my mom and dad, who could ID. They could confirm that's my sister, and then her cremains would be sent to wherever the family chose. So the process is, once they're identified, they would be repatriated to wherever the family wishes. In the case where they don't know the ID, there's also been a few, to me, heartbreaking cases where the family clearly can't afford to repatriate the remains, so they choose not to claim their relative. And then they go to they are cremated, and the cremains are stored at a cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery here in Tucson, in these big vaults. The cremains are there. And so that's the process for that.
Thanks, Kat. The next question comes from Rick. The series of slides year by year is very powerful. Is it available? And I think I can answer that, and anybody else who wants to chime in certainly may. We'll have the recording here, so you're able to consult that as later if you'd like. Kat, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
If it's something that folks are of interest, I could potentially PDF it and put it on our website so that it's accessible. I literally put it together last night, and it is very powerful to go from 1981 to today, so I can look into doing that. Maybe after the walk is done, I can make it accessible on the website.
Thanks. Michaela says her question is, what is the most important thing that we can do as Migrant Trail participants this week? That's a big question. Lupe, Kat?
Go ahead, Lupe.
I think that, I don't know that it's the most important, but certainly to make not only ourselves aware, but also to bring in those around our community, our family members and others, to know the region in a way that goes against what is the stereotype of the border, right? As like I started my discussion, the border is almost an abstract that is used by politicians and others to bring about a border that is not the reality, right? And I think that those of us who are in this region see ourselves in a different way. Let me explain this. I grew up in Tucson in a very segregated barrio, and eventually we were told we were a slum, and then it was torn down, right? We never thought we lived in a slum, right? And so I think that we have to make ourselves aware, whether it's through different organizations, but we have to become part of a community. We have to join for justice. If it's Black Lives Matter, whatever the organization that you are going to affiliate yourself, be part of, is to bring about, because we all have to pull together, and that impacts on what is going on at the border. And so I think it's meditation, it's thinking, it's reading, it's learning, it's communicating. It's endless. We must never stop. We have to keep moving toward social change for justice and peace. And for example, right now, we were looking at the pictures that Kat put up of the children. I don't know if any of you saw the New York Times of the children in the Gaza who were killed. Every single baby. We have to not only react to that in an emotional way, but we must do something concretely.
Yeah. Thank you, Lupe. Is there anything you want to add to that, Kat?
I just completely agree with Lupe. I think that one of the most powerful things is when I talk to organizers in other spaces, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's environmental issues, other issues, organizers make those connections, and the community doesn't always make those connections. But when you see babies, we see babies, right? Moms see babies. But it shouldn't just be the babies. It should also be like the men, right? It should be the women. It should be all of the life. And I think that step one is recognizing how interconnected our struggles are, and being able to see that. And the other is to speak up about it. And, there's a lot going on in the world that requires that. And it's a lot of discomfort that requires that, because we all have some or one or multiple people in our family or in our circles and our communities who challenge that. And so it is an invitation as well to do the work as people of privilege to help make those connections for the people around us, and to see how those intersect, and that we are stronger together. It matters, all those things. It matters that we recognize each other's struggles.
Yeah, Kat, thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking about the history that Lupe reminds us of, or maybe this is a view on history that is new to some of you. Kat has reminded us of what has just happened, and both Kat and Lupe have reminded us of the now. So knowledge is a big part of this, and sharing it, and using it as a call to action, as a call to bear witness. These are all the things that I've taken in over the years from the wisdom of the people of the community I walk with, in my own life and ways. So that's a great question to ask, and one I hope that folks keep in mind. We all bring different talents and experiences and gifts to this walk, our own histories, and we're all going to be able to do things differently. But the important thing is to do things, to act in the ways that are available to you. So one last question, at least that I'm seeing right now. Could you share the source of link of where we can find the list of names for ongoing knowledge and to speak their names throughout the year? That's a question from Anna. And then she ends that question with presente, which is something we'll be doing throughout the week, to say the names of those who have gone, and to remember them, but also to say presente, that they are here with us now. Okay, does anybody want to answer that?
I can, because I know this is going to be recorded, I'm going to share my screen and show you how to find that information. Because I am a huge fan of people having direct access to the information, so you can create your own. So I will share my screen. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to Humane Borders website right here. And then you're going to click here and make a donation. I'm kidding, but you should donate. Humane Borders is a wonderful sponsor and ally, and they have water stations. Right here, there's a link that says death maps, and there's migrant death mapping and printable maps and posters. So if you go to the migrant death mapping, it's going to take you to another page, which is this OGIS, their Open GIS for deceased migrants is how they call it. So you want the interactive map, and then you put the map of migrant mortality. And then you actually can choose. So you can actually, if you know somebody who passed, like I've looked up people, relatives of people who've asked me, occasionally somebody has asked me, like, can you give me the coordinates where he died? I gave that to a friend recently. His father was, after many, many years, was identified. And I was able to show him the little red dot that was his father, which was just heartbreaking. So I actually left everything blank except the year, and I just chose each year. So that's how I said, oh, wow, they go all the way back to 81. So like we could pick, say, for example, we could pick 2014, leave everything else blank, and then hit search, and you get this map. And you can actually zoom in. You can change it to the satellite view, or I think it's default satellite view. So you can change it. I think the one I did is in this view, the non-satellite version. You can actually zoom in on, and you can click on an individual dot, and you can find out about that person, that specific person there. Also, once you hit this, underneath the map down here is the actual list. So if you wanted to do the names yourself, you can get all the names here, and you'll see unidentified male. Sometimes you'll see it where there's no gender listed, and that's because they weren't able to determine, unless they do DNA, whether the person's male or female. But this gives you, if they know it, their name, their age, and then it gives you where their remains were recovered. And that's how these maps were made. And up here in this corner, it gives you the number for that year. So these are where I got the numbers for the chart. So if you wanted to make your own or tailor your own, this is where it is. If you wanted to get into a heated discussion with your racist uncle about how this is like real, and you wanted to be very specific, like you could actually put in, males, or you could put females, or you could, so you can search in whatever way you're wanting, to be able to show what you'd like. You can search by cause of death, by the county they were discovered. Most of the remains recovered are in Pima County. That's where Tucson is. That's where all of this area is. And Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner also does for Santa Cruz and I think Sierra Vista, or not Sierra Vista, Cochise. I think they also do those. So you can look through all the different. So this is where I got the information. And then you can also generate your own lists if you'd like, and you can print them. So that is where the information is. And I am very happy to share that if you're with all of you.
I think that one additional thing that I would like to share is these are the deaths that are here in Arizona, but obviously the deaths are across the border from California all the way to Texas. And then also the journey itself from wherever people are coming, whether they're coming from South America, Central America, and now you find people coming from from Africa, from the Caribbean, and so forth. The journey is a long one, and there are deaths all along the way. You know, and burials have been found, for example, in northern Mexico, where some of the cartels will extort some of the migrants or for whatever purposes. So the death is a constant for many of these people. And in conversation, it isn't that migrants do not know what they confront, but I think we have to understand what choices they have, whether it's climatic, economic, whatever conditions they live in that propels them to go. And one voice that stays clearly in my mind was many years ago, talking to a young woman from Guatemala whose brother, 17-year-old brother, died on the desert. And she said, what choice do I have? Of course we know we can die, but what choice do I have? To die there or to make the effort? This is why we have to see and understand that the choices are you know, deeply considered in propelling people to move, to go. And in other words, breaking down the walls that we are building. You know, so I think we have to understand the agency of these individuals, and that we respect and remember those that are in journey as we speak right now, whether it's on the Mediterranean Sea or wherever they may be. They are in journey, and those are the people that we should also remember.
Yes, absolutely, Lupe.
Those living in refugee camps, you know, it's
So as we close out here tonight, let us remember. And I'll ask Kat to read to us the names of those we're remembering this year out of the many who have died just within this part of Arizona on the border. But keep in mind all those as well who died in other places along the border with the United States and Mexico, but all across the world. And as we do that, it is our tradition in the Migrant Trail, as it is elsewhere, to say presente after each name. So feel free to do that at home and let us remember the names. So Kat, I'll turn it over to you.
How about I say the name and you can say presente, Christy, and we'll
Sounds
invite
good.
you at home to say it along with. Obviously, this was, maybe it's not obviously if you don't speak Spanish. Desconocida is an unknown female. Desconocido is an unknown male. And when we say desconocido a, it means that the sex of the person was not is not known at this time. So I will start now. Desconocido.
Presente.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Mario Chen Tahuico.
Presente.
Marcelino Diaz Gomez.
Presente.
Jose Caro Hernández.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocida.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Víctor Vives Cordero.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Fines Valencia Santos.
Presente.
Miguel Orduño Argüelles.
Presente.
Silverio Pacheco Medina.
Presente.
Juliana Zapata Corrales.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocida.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocida.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Juan Gómez Gómez.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Edith Álvarez Galeana.
Presente.
Samuel Hernández Pérez.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Silverio Rosales Hernández.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Pablo Flores Ramírez.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
José Peralta Noperi.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Joel Rodríguez Herrera.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Vicente Ramírez López.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Javier Mendoza Mendoza.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
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 Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocida.
Presente.
Rogelino Pérez Pastor.
Presente.
Desconocido a.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Presente.
Lorenzo Bartolo Cardona.
Presente.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Presente.
Desconocida.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Sergio Santiago Antonio.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Otilio Serrano Garay.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Manuel Yajón Meletz.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Juan Carillo Gómez.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Cristian Hernández Antonio.
Presente.
Johnny Tiney Shen.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
Presente.
Desconocida.
Presente.
Desconocida.
Presente.
Desconocido.
Presente.
Desconocido A.
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 Presente.
María González Núñez.
Presente. Thank you, Kat, for reading us all those names. Before we're done tonight, I do want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors this year for the Migrant Trail. And then just give one more announcement after that. I'd like to recognize, and you can visit this on the azmigranttrail.com webpage that you've all visited already. And if somebody might be so kind as to throw this in the chat, I would invite you to do so. The Tucson Peace Center, Border Links, Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, Immigration Justice Task Force, Casa de Paz, Casa Maria, the Community of Christ of the Desert, Frontera de Cristo, the Green Valleys, Warita Samaritans, Mennonite Central Committee, No More Deaths, Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, and the Tucson Borderlands Young Adult Volunteer. Those are our sponsors for this year. Thank you for putting that in the chat, Zoom Master. And then the last thing I'd like to say is we do not have many opportunities for community as we have our speakers, but we'd like to invite folks at the end of each evening, I believe, and again in your small groups to we'll go ahead and add you as panelists should you decide to stay on, and you can say hello to folks together tonight as we close everything out. I want to thank again Kat, Lupe, Magda, who isn't here, but for sharing with us again some important words and history and wisdom and reasons why we're here. And to set us off on the week we have ahead of us. So thank you all. And now we'll go ahead and end tonight. But leave it open for a bit for everybody to say hello to each other, should you so choose. If not, we'll see you in community. Don't forget to check out your participant packet that will have information for you. There will be some information coming tonight as far as reflections and podcasts and readings and all that too. So stay tuned. If you'd like to stick around, go ahead and do so. And I think that's it. Anything else? Okay. All right. Yeah, thanks. And thanks to you participants as well for joining us here this evening. Okay, I think Saulo is opening it up to folks. Should you want to stay around and say hello?
Salo, did you want to stop the recording now?